Over the past few weeks, we've been encouraging you to sign up for groups, to take a card, fill that out, and put your location preference and night preference for group. Season is here, and so next week is actually the last day to register for this round of groups. Like we would like to start some as we move into the year, have some other groups starting, but for this little round of groups, you need to go ahead and sign up for that because registration closes up on that for next week. Okay, so be mindful of that. And if you're still today like, I don't know, well, you can actually go. We have the link for the website there, villagechurchnc.org/group link. You can go there online during the week if you're like, okay, now I'm in, and you can sign up there through our website. And speaking of group link, once you have registered for groups, once you signed up for those, on the 25th of August, which is 2 weeks from today, we're hosting what we call Group Link, where we come and we you meet your groups. We will cook out, going to grill out at the Clay County Rec Park off of Myers Chapel Road. We'll be getting you an address for that in the coming weeks. We're going to do that at 4:30 that evening. You come, meet your group, and maybe you'll come and you'll be like, oh, that person's in my group. Just remember, if that's you, that you might be that person for that person, right? So we're all that person, aren't we, to somebody? So, but be ready for that. Be paying attention to that. It's good evening to come together. Good to meet groups, have fun, just hanging out together. We'll play some cornhole, and it'll be a great time together. So, two big deals going on in the next 2 weeks. I got to tell you, I feel sorry for August, right? I do. I feel sorry for August because August seems to be like the worst month. Right? It's the worst month. I mean, kids, think about it. You know what I'm talking about. You students, you go back to school in August. I mean, so strike 1 and 2 right there, right? You go back to school in August. Teachers, you maybe hate August as well. It's technically still summertime. You get the heat of summer, but you're at school or everything's getting back to normal. So it's not really summertime, but it is sort of kind of. So I've started feeling sorry for August. I mean, poor August, right? So in the next few minutes, let's redeem August. How about that? Let's make a pact together. Let's redeem August in a little segment we want to call here, Why August Might Possibly Be Better Than You Think Maybe. Okay? Why August might possibly be better than you think maybe. It is actually an exciting time of the year. Just consider this. College football kicks off this month. Yeah, boy, college football gets. See, there's Jake Fromm of my beloved Georgia Bulldogs and 2 other folks. I don't know who those folks are up there. I do know who they are. I just don't want to talk about them. But college football gets cranked up. I'm excited about it. My team opens on the 31st. Actually, the 24th is when the Miami Hurricanes play some podunk school from Florida that day too. So. It's actually the Florida Gators, but that's anyway. So they're playing on the 24th. So it's an exciting month for sports fans. Not only college football, but NFL is getting started as well. We actually have a picture here of Julio Jones making the greatest catch in Super Bowl history right there. I got so excited when he caught that ball, I blacked out. I don't even remember what happened. The Falcons won, right? I mean, yoo-hoo, right? Great. If they didn't, don't tell me. But it was great catch. So NFL is here. Training camp has started. This is funny, by the way. I don't know if you saw this, if you sports fans. There's a guy right now who's refusing to play because they won't let him wear his favorite helmet. How about that, right? That's good times. I ought to give him one of those old throwback helmets, with no face mask. It's just the leather head there. Anyway, So pro football is getting kicked off, and maybe you're a fantasy football person. You're excited about that. You're doing your scouting. You're figuring that out. We actually hold a couple of fantasy football leagues here at Village. If you're interested, let me know. I will warn you, though, if you're competing in one of the leagues that my soon-to-be 14-year-old son is in, we're all playing for second, right? He's 3 years in a row. He's won that stinking thing. I've been playing for 15 years and maybe won once. So doggone it. Just fair warning. There, so that's coming. Maybe you're not a sports fan. You're like, oh, give me another good reason for August. So maybe you're a music fan. From what I understand, the Queen of Pop, Miss Taylor Swift, has a new album coming out this month. There's one of her old albums, but you Swifties can get excited about that, about a new album from her. Weddings have been going on. Andrew mentioned earlier we had a family here from Village last night. They celebrated a wedding last night. It was a great time together. There's another family in our church that's getting ready to celebrate a wedding here in a couple weeks. So it's cool, man. These weddings are happening. New families are getting started. It's a neat thing to see. So that's exciting. This is an interesting one, and maybe you go there with me. But there's no eclipse this year, right? No eclipse. Remember last year we had the eclipse and like time literally stopped around here. And while the eclipse was cool, you know what wasn't cool? All the thousands of people that just kind of hung out with us that week, right? Like you didn't just go to Ingles, you planned to go to Ingles, right? So no eclipse, so you get to enjoy whatever day that would have been last year, that you get to enjoy that this year. And then finally, school is back in session. School is back in session. Here, for some of you, you're like, oh no. But there's a faction of you out there that are kind of excited that school is back. And do I have a picture of that? And everybody's putting their picture up of the kids, right? I love this kid's sign. Help me, I have 10 more years of these pictures, right? Everybody's putting their kids getting ready for school. But there's some of us out there that are pretty excited about school coming back and routine being established. You know where your kids are from 8 to 3. Everything's good, right? For some of you, you're excited about school. And then we're excited for August around here because, as I mentioned earlier, it is group season. It is group season here at Village. We are excited as folks get settled into groups as we start another group season. So we are super excited about that because our groups are an effort here to live out some of what we call our DNA here at Village. That we believe we're better together. That when we come together, we are better than we ever could be on our own. That's anything you can do that we can do better. We love getting into groups. And this could be a little bit of a change for some of you because there's a chance maybe you grew up in a church dynamic where attendance was kind of the be-all and end-all for being a church goer, right? That if you were there on Sunday morning, it was a big deal. In fact, it was such a big deal that it almost determined your standing with God, didn't it? Like, that was such a big deal that you had to be there at church. We knew a guy at a church we were going to a while back, and he was involved with a kids program for years and years and years. And he graduated from the kids program into being a leader when he was in his high school years. And something came up. He had perfect attendance all those years, right? All those years he had perfect attendance. And then he got to it was like the last week of it, but he had a thing for school, right? A thing for school going on. So he had to miss the church program, the kids program, to be at this school function. And you know what they did? They held another special kids meeting so he could be there, so he could have perfect attendance. Sly, right? Just sly. Holy cow. Like, perfect attendance was such a big deal. And I just got to say, just as personal, this is not representing Jesus at all when I say this. I sit in my kids' awards things, and I always see the kids that get awarded for perfect attendance. And you know what I think? Poor kid. Poor kid. Somebody needs to show that kid Ferris Bueller's Day Off, man. I mean, come on. Bueller, right, man? Come on. But maybe you grew up with that in mind, like attendance. You had to be there. And maybe your family went above and beyond, and you were there Sunday morning and Sunday evening, right? Or maybe your family went to infinity and above and beyond, that you were there Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday evening, right? You were always at church. In fact, some churches that I know of, if you hang around long enough and enough of the time, they'll put you in charge. Right? It's like, oh man, we need somebody to lead this team. Let's get old Bob to lead this team. Old Bob is dead in the corner. He's been there for a month and nobody's noticed, right? But let's put him in charge. That's literally, some churches, that's how they function. You show up enough, they put you in charge. And while, yes, being here, every morning you're here, this is my favorite thing to do on a Sunday morning, is to come and to be together with you, right? It's a big deal. But, if you've grown up thinking that with your perspective has been that if I'm at church, like that's determining things for me, then maybe today will be a bit of a perspective shift for you, right? Because maybe you did the whole going to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday evening, and you noticed that it really didn't seem to be making much of a difference, right? Like you just keep showing up, but nothing's happening, right? That maybe your life, though always present at a church building, was maybe a mess, right? Like in here it was cool, but outside of these walls it was just like, something is not clicking for me. And in fact, maybe for you, as soon as you got out of having to go to church, you quit. You ran as far away as you could from going to church because it didn't seem to be making that much of a difference. And see, that's the part we want to get right as a church. It's the difference-making part. It's the part where lives are being changed because of who Jesus is, because there is another and a better way than just coming and attending and sitting and listening and hearing all the time. Because while you look fantastic in these rows each Sunday morning, there is a better way. And it's when you and I break out of a row and get into a circle, right? And get into a circle. And together we are learning and growing and talking about and living out who God has called us to be, right? Who God has called us to be on this journey that you and I are on together, right? And part of it, yes, does involve us hearing and listening and having folks open the scriptures and listening to the words of Jesus. That's a big, big deal. But there's also another part of it, because that's just part of it. But when we get into circles together, that's a huge deal as well. Because for many of us, our stories, who we are today, involve who we've been with in the past, right? The groups of people that we've been around. I'm the man today that I am because of the groups of people I've been around. I was a youth group brat, man. Anytime something was going on in youth group, those were my people. I was always around them. In fact, I loved it so much, just so I could stay in a youth group, I decided to be a student leader, just so I could stay in youth group, right? I didn't have to graduate out of that. And so then, again, so more and more of that. I am a product, and you are a product of the groups you've been a part of. I'm a man today because of them. I'm a husband today because of them. I'm the father I am today because of them. I'm the friend I am today because of the groups I have been a part of. And that's just one of the many benefits of groups. They help us move to where we want to be. And maybe you're thinking, well, what is it? What is it that I really want this morning? Where's the destination? What is it I want to arrive at? And so I'll tell you what you want, what you really, really want this morning, all right? And here it is. So you ready? I know what you want. At the end of the day, when your head hits the pillow, here's what you want, all right? And it's not success. It's not fame. It's not wealth. It's none of that stuff. Those are great. Sure, fine, they're good. But what you and I want at the end of the day is security, right? It's security. That we know that it's going to be okay, right? That's what we want. Students, spoiler alert, that's what you're going to want out of life, right? That's what you're going to want out of life. You're going to want to be firmly planted, to want to have a strong foundation. That's what all of us, white, black, single, married, divorced, widowed, whoever, wherever, whatever, that's what we want. That is what we want out of life. And you can push back on that. You can. But it's true. It is true. Are you familiar? You remember Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We had our hierarchy of needs that Maslow said that we had, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5 before we could kind of be have self-actualization, right? Just big psychology terms there. But Maslow said, so the bottom rung of the hierarchy of needs is that you had to have your physiological needs met, right? Air, water, food, right? Those had to be met for you and me to keep going on the pillar of needs. But the second one, do you know what it was? Essentially, it's security. We need security, right? We need to have that. We need to feel that. And the crazy part about this is Abraham Maslow didn't make that up, right? He didn't create that. He just discovered it. He discovered it. And we discover it as well through the teaching of Jesus, because Jesus tells us about this. In fact, Jesus doesn't only tell us we are looking for security in our lives. He tells us how we can go about finding it. He's good like that, right? He's good. And so we're going to be looking at a passage today. We're going to look at a couple of passages. We're going to start at one in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew is the first gospel writer. He gets lead off in the New Testament. And Matthew was a Jewish tax collector, which if you were a Jewish person at the time and you heard the words Jewish tax collector, you thought, I hate that guy, right? Because you did. You couldn't stand Jewish tax collectors because they were working for Rome and they were taking money from you. So Matthew meets Jesus, changes his life forever, and Matthew writes the first eyewitness account of Jesus' life that we have in order of the New Testament. And Matthew, in chapters 5 through 7, records the most famous sermon of all time. We call the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is adroitly offering these incredible words on what it looks like to follow God, what it looks like to be in good relationship with each other. And then he gets to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and he shares this interesting story. It's a metaphor on construction, right? On construction. I call it construction instructions. And Jesus was a carpenter, so he would know his construction. But he's going to paint this picture, this metaphor of how you and I can go about finding the security we're looking for. And so in chapter 7 of Matthew, in verse 24, Jesus says this: "Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Right? Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, they are good at construction here. They know what they're doing. They're building their house on the rock, right? They're practicing good construction. Then he says, "The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock," right? The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house. That house wasn't going anywhere. It was secure on the rock. Remember how you got there? By hearing and practicing. Like, that's how we get there. But Jesus goes on in verse 26. He says, "But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." So Jesus makes a distinction between these two folks here. One's building their house on the rock. Streams, rain, wind coming, that house is going to stand. Other person builds their house on the sand. Rain, streams, winds come, that house falls, has a great crash. Right? What's the difference between the two? Well, the person who built their house on the rock hears the words of Jesus, puts them into practice. Person who built their house on sand hears the words of Jesus, doesn't put it into practice. You know what's interesting about this? I mean, it's an incredible metaphor Jesus makes here. But what's interesting is that the rains and the streams and the wind, they come for everybody in this story, don't they? They don't differentiate. It's as if Jesus is saying, those are going to happen to you and to me. Rain, streams, wind, they're coming. How have you built your house? Metaphorically, are you hearing and practicing? Or are you just hearing with no practice? And I left out a word in this passage that I want us to go back and look at. The first word of verse 24 is this word. It's therefore. Right? It's therefore. Jesus says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." And maybe you're like me. You've grown up hearing that whenever you see a therefore, it's there for a reason, right? That you have to find out what the therefore is there for. And in this case, the therefore is there for what comes before, right? A little tongue-tied and confused there, but the therefore is there for what comes before, right? Whatever's come before. So what Jesus has talked about before all this was what we call the Sermon on the Mount. He's talked about what it looks like to be in a good relationship with him and with the people around you. He talks about prayer. He talks about purity. He talks about giving. He talks about forgiving people, right? All of this in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is saying, you've heard these words of mine. And the wise person is going to build their house, is going to construct their life on these words, not just the hearing, but then putting them into practice. Jesus is saying that's where security, that's where foundation comes from. Hearing my words and putting them into practice, right? It's like you're building a house. So let's come back to me and you. Have you ever tried, this is rhetorical, on your own to live out Jesus' words? On your own, to muster all the strength you could to do what Jesus says here. And if you have, on your own, how successful have you been? Because I'll tell you, Jesus' words have been important to me for a long time. And I've tried my best to put them into practice for a long time. Do you know when it works best for me? When I got people around me that are helping me, right, live out his words. And when we strive to do something, we strive to be successful at it, right? None of us set out to do something just to fail, right? I'm going to try to learn how to ride a bike today. Oh, awesome. At the end of the day, I'm just assuming I'm going to fail, right? No, it's not good to do that. So we're going to need, as John, Paul, George, and Ringo told us, a little help from our friends, right, when it comes to applying Jesus's words. Because according to Jesus, the storms are coming, right? The storms are coming for you and for me. No one gets out of that. And you know who I love to encourage with this kind of stuff? Encourage to get involved with groups at a young age. That'd be students. Because students, many of you have yet to experience some of these crashes that Jesus is talking about. Adults, we could speak to this, right? Some of us have had those houses. We thought we were built on a rock. Turns out it was on sand, right? We've had those houses fall with a great crash. But students, I love that you get to get this right on the front end, right? And we adults are here for you, cheering you on in that. It's as if Jesus is saying the bottom line is this, that the hearing and the doing are what make the difference. Like the hearing and the doing. It's one thing just to hear, right? To just fill our minds with the hearing. It's another thing for that to affect the whole person, right? And listen, when you come on a Sunday morning, what we're doing is we're hearing. We're hearing. And listen, we love that you come to hear, right? That you're captive with us for about 40 minutes and we can get up here and speak words of life to you. That's exciting. That's exciting. But it's more than that it's the doing as well. In fact, our mission statement here as a church is that we want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. And that relationship grows as the relationship between our hearing and our doing gets better, right? As it gets better. It's kind of like having exercise equipment, and we use this example a lot, but you can have the best exercise equipment in the world, can't you? And if you don't ever get on that elliptical or that treadmill or use those dumbbells or barbells or whatever you're using, it really doesn't matter, does it? Right? They'll be like, hey, look at there. Isn't that great? I'm not going to use it, but that's fantastic, isn't it? Right? It doesn't really make a difference. Unless you're doing, there's no difference being made. And the same applies to our relationship with God and our faith deepening. In fact, Jesus' half-brother James picked up on this idea in a letter he wrote to the church. When he said this in James 1, verse 22 through 25, he said, do not merely listen to the word or Jesus' words or the New Testament. Don't merely listen to it and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. James is saying the difference is in the doing, right? Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom, whoever's investing in the scriptures and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. This image he's working with here of the mirror, right? So Jesus runs with a construction example. James picks up the image of the mirror. See, we have a hard time with this because we got mirrors everywhere, don't we? I mean, in the bathrooms, you look at yourself, one last look before you get out the door. Right, there you are. Right, then maybe there's a mirror in your hall that you see as you're leaving the house. You know, when you get in the car, what are you doing? You're checking your mirrors, right? We got mirrors all over the place. So to forget what we look like, how in the world? Right, that's crazy. But in those days, they didn't have mirrors just lying around all over the place. You were lucky once a week to see yourself in the mirror. So you better take a good look, right? Because you might not see yourself again a week later. Like you see yourself in the mirror, like, oh gosh, that's what's been going on there. Hey, great, well, somebody told me about that, right? But James is saying this is what happens when we don't do. We hear, then we walk away and we forget. It's like forgetting what we look like. To take this call up alone that James is calling us to, it's going to be it'll almost ensure failure if we're not doing this with other people. And a sociologist named Robert Bellah said this. He said, we find ourselves not independently of other people and institutions, but through them. We never get to the bottom of ourselves on our own. We discover who we are side by side with others in work, love, and learning. All of our activity goes on in relationships, groups, associations, and communities, ordered by institutional structures and interpreted by cultural patterns of meaning. And from Village's very first day, this has been our goal, for folks to find themselves in groups, out of rows into circles. Because we know from our own experience that something incredible happens when you're face to face with other people in a circle. When it comes to applying Scripture, and that will never ever happen right where we are this morning. But when we're face to face with others and we're striving to combine the hearing and the doing, we're talking about where the rubber meets the road, about how what we're hearing from God and what we're reading in the Scriptures applies to your relationships, not just a relationship. What you're hearing about your finances, not just a general about someone else's finances. What you're hearing about your attitude and your forgiveness issues, and how it's not just generalities, it's dealing with what's actually going on in us. And we've discovered that life happens there when application begins to take place, with the specifics of what to do after you've heard, and with what you've heard, and how you can become more of the person that God's made you to be, how you can grow in that security that God has called us to. In fact, what we're in need of, we're in need of a bridge for the gap between our heads and our hearts, aren't we? We're in need of a bridge. Because when we're hearing all the time, it's just that your head's just soaking up, right? Just taking more in. But for it to begin to work itself out in your life, you need a bridge from your head to your heart. Because what happens is all this information that you're taking in, all this knowledge, all this hearing that you're doing, you need a way for it to get to your heart. Because if it can get to your heart, it'll begin to soften your heart, right? And then be activated in your hands and in your feet, that the life of Christ will grow in you. But too often, you know what I'd rather do instead of building a bridge from my heart to my head, from my head to my heart, is I would rather build a wall, right, around my heart. I joked with the group this morning, I can't even say that anymore without it taking a political bent, but don't hear that, right? Building a wall around your heart, right? Building a wall around your heart. I'd rather isolate myself than spend time with other folks. And I love you guys, you're great, right? But I kind of like just being on my own. But you know what isolation doesn't do when we're left alone all the time? That doesn't build a bridge, right? That builds walls. When all the time what I'm doing is I'm watching my worldview news, right? When I'm watching news, that I'm just waiting for them to agree, right? That we're watching, it's like, I'm just amen and amen, that's right, right? Just agreeing with whatever I already think, right? When I'm reading my articles that are just reinforcing my worldview about the way I think things are. When I'm listening to my worldview radio hosts or talk show hosts or podcasts, just reinforcing what I already thought, right? Because I'm in isolation, nobody else is in group with me, doing life with me, and it is building a wall around my heart. Instead of softening my heart to activate my hands and feet to live out the life of Christ, isolation's hardening my heart. And you know what can happen to us the more we do that? Is that we become real life Scrooges. Right? Remember him from Christmas Carol? Real life Scrooges. And it doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't happen in a year. But in a lifetime, ultimately, you know where we're going if that's what we continue to do with our lives? We'll become bitter old people who've been ruined by the walls we've built instead of the bridges from our head to our heart. It's too easy to get lost in my own ideas, isn't it? It's too easy to get lost in your ideas, and that skews our thinking about the rest of the world. Because here's what happens. The more we do that, the more we build the walls in our hearts, the more we walk around thinking, oh, well, I got it figured out. You know, if people just listen to me, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know what's right. I know this. I know that. And before you know it, you're like, I know. I got all the answers. Which is great if there was nobody else around you. But we have to do life with each other, right? We got to figure this out. Knowledge and application. Our hearing has to lead to doing, and we are in need of a bridge to get that knowledge from our head to our hearts, and then to live itself out through our body. I love what Eugene Peterson says when he says, every generation faces a changed culture, different social problems and challenges, new patterns of work, evolving economic and political conditions. Much of what a Christian community in each generation does is learn together how this is done in its particular circumstances. So, what can help us begin building some bridges from our heads to our hearts? And I want to give you three. There's probably 3,000. For our time together, here's three of them. Okay, the first one is this. What can build a bridge from your head to your heart is when you start stepping out in faith. Start taking the words of Jesus and trying to live them. Will you fail? Probably. But there is good in the attempt. Just as an example, maybe it involves giving your money to causes that you value. Right? Maybe it involves that. And maybe you want to say, oh gosh, I knew you were going to give that example. Sorry about that. Secondly, though, is this, that Jesus so often speaks of our money and our hearts being connected. That wherever your money's going, that's where your heart's going too. And so Jesus would say, well, give to something that you are passionate about, that you care about. And truth be told, you're here on Village Sunday mornings. I would hope you're passionate about what's going on here at Village, that you would take him up on that, right? All right, Jesus, you said to do this. I don't want to do it. I don't like to do it, but I'm going to do it because you said do it. You step out in faith. Before you know it, that bridge is getting built. Right, that bridge is getting built. Another way is through prayer. And I don't mean list praying, right? Like, Jesus, give me, amen, see you tomorrow. Right? Not that kind of praying. Although, every once in a while it's okay to pray in that way. But instead, kind of getting still for a minute. Just listening. Right? When's the last time you did that? Just listening. Because here's what's going to happen when you do that. God will remind you of things you should be about. Right? God will remind you, oh man, I meant to send them a text message congratulating them on that. Oh man, I meant to send a card because their grandfather died and I was going to do that. Oh, thanks for reminding me. Right? Have yourself a pen and a pad right there to write that out when it happens. That prayer helps that. Build that bridge from our heart to our head. And then finally, as you probably guessed, community. Community builds that bridge from your heart to your head. When you each week are getting together with a group of people and you are talking about the scriptures, you are sharing what's going on as you read the scriptures, as you encounter them. You're sharing your stories. This is who I am. This is how I've become the person I've become. Did you know that during New Testament days that, of course, they didn't have Bibles laying around like we do. There's no printing press, so they didn't, when they went to whatever kind of church gathering they were going to, they were like, oh, one of the 10 Bibles at my house. I'll take this one. They didn't have that. They didn't have apps on the phone, none of that, right? And what they did was they went to wherever, maybe it was Joe's house, and Joe got a letter from Peter, right? And they're going to read that together. That's how you listened and you heard the scriptures. You did in a group, right? Wow, what an interesting practice, maybe even for us today as a community of people, right? To begin hearing the words of Jesus in groups. See, groups help bridge the gap from your head to your heart. Before you know it, you find yourself living out the words of Christ, right? And finding that it's making a difference in your life as it's creating and building you on a foundation, right? That the storms may come, but that foundation is still there. And if that's not convincing enough for you this morning, I want us to use our imaginations just for a minute. Use your imagination. Imagine if maybe some of you, not all of you, maybe some of you, if you had been raised in a home where your mom and dad saw this as a priority, that they weren't content just to sit in rows, but they wanted to be in a group where they could find life together, where the bridge from their heart to their head was being built. Right? For some of you, that would have meant growing up in a home where your dad would have been there, with a father in your home, as opposed to one who left. Because there would have been a group of men that would have been able, would have been empowered to track him down and say, hey, you can't leave, can't do this, come back. We can't let you go. Right? For some of you, maybe they've been growing up with a mom who had less chemical dependency, right? And drugs or alcohol, I don't know. If that mom had a group of women around her who had the authority in her life to come to her and say, we've got to talk about this because this is a problem and it's affecting your family. Maybe your entire life, your trajectory would have been changed if that had happened. For some of you, life would have been a whole lot different. Maybe things would be different had you in high school or in college had a group of students around you who could speak into your life, who knew who you are and what you were going through and how they could care for you. Listen, this doesn't work because of something we created. We just discovered this by watching how Jesus, the first thing Jesus did when he started his public ministry? He got in a small group, got 12 guys, he said, hey, let's do life together for the next 3 years. And they changed the stinking world, right? He got in a group. He got in a group. And the New Testament prescribes this. This is how it's to be done. At the end of the day, we want the same thing for you that you want, security. We want you to be secure. That when the rains come, when the streams rise, when the winds blow and beat against your house, that you're going to stand firm. Not because of all the things you've heard and all the things you know, but because all the stuff you heard and you know that you begin to put into practice in your life. Because of the gap that you bridged from head to heart and then gets worked out in your whole person. And this doesn't only benefit you, I mean it does, but also benefits your kids. Your kids' kids, your kids' kids' kids, and the generations coming before you. I love how James in this passage we looked at, he says this, that you do this, right? You don't forget what you've heard, but you put into practice. The outcome of this was you will be blessed in what you do. Where do I sign up for that? I want to be blessed in what I do. So get in a group. Join up with a group. Find a group of people, right? And we'll fill out a card, drop it in the basket as you leave today. And again, you may come to this and be like, oh, that person's in my group. Oh, again, you could be that person for that person, right? But something incredible happens when we begin to do life together that doesn't happen when we're on our own. So, get in a group. Let's pray together.